Welcome to tonight's Halloween special, where we will explore multiple shorter stories that are gonna be sure to bring a chill down your neck. Tonight's first story, The Handprint. This happened at my friend's house a couple years ago. It was the first time she'd thrown a big party like this for Halloween. A couple of my friends and I ended up spending the night there because no one was in any shape or mood to drive home at 2 in the morning. We crashed in her living room. The house was small and it only had one floor. The living room is to the right of the front door. Lots of windows and a big pond out in the front. Everything else is an empty field. Adjacent to the living room was the dining room and the kitchen to the left of it. You've got your classic creepy hallway, completed with an old dusty mirror at the end of it. There were about 7 of us total, sitting in the living room, when all of a sudden, my friend stopped, claiming she heard a noise. So she and another one of the guests went down the hall to have a look as the rest of us continued to doze off. That was until they came running out, shutting the curtains and turning off as many lights as they could. They urged us to do the same. We shut all the curtains and turned off every light in the house, except for a couple of flashlights. That's when our lovely hostess started handing out steak and butcher knives for protection. At this point, the rest of us just wanted to understand just what the fuck got them so upset. Apparently, they gotten halfway down the hallway when one of them noticed a movement in the corner of her eye. She looked into the office, the first door on the right, which faced the front of the house. There was a handprint on the window. This would only seem a little odd, but the handprint was on the outside of the window and had never been there before. Mind you, this was a small house. We were partying all over the place. Someone had to have been outside in the last 10 or 20 minutes to make it. The only other problem was that the window in question was elevated 2 meters off from the floor. As far as I'm concerned, no one at the party was 2.5 meters tall. By now, all of us were thoroughly freaked out about the fresh handprint, except for me. Me, being oddly disinterested in freaky shit, went outside to see the handprint. That's when I realized how tall you actually had to be to make a handprint at the top of the window like that. I figured no one else had noticed yet. Besides, scaring people who are holding steak knives is a stupid idea. I went back in to check on everyone. They'd consider calling the cops, but the house wasn't made with a working landline, causing the reception to go to shit. I decided to calm everyone down and try to convince them that some guys got proper plastered and just hopped up to slap the window like that. Since no one had considered the height of the window, they believed me all the way to the next morning. When everyone went to sleep at night, I didn't. I ended up staying up because I knew the one thing I hadn't told everybody. I knew the truth, and I figured I should be awake in case there was a break-in. I had to use the bathroom earlier that night, and I found a similar handprint on the bathroom window, which happened to be at least 1/2 meter higher than the one the others had found. And when I walked outside, I realized that half the windows on the front of the house had handprints. But to this day, I think I'm the only one who has discovered that. Movie Buff, written by Lordfudgington. I can see him out there. I know this game. Helpless, unsuspecting 20-something having a quiet night in while their folks are out of town. Sits down to watch a scary movie. The setup is just too perfect. The only chance I got is getting the first strike in. I'm not fucking going down like some 2-dimensional aging star trying to pretend they're a teenager. Tools. What have I got? Enough, I hope. A quick check to make sure he's still there. Yeah, he's gone nowhere. I can see the mask and flowing black. Scream. The film about avoiding film cliches. and here I find one stood right in front of me. The only thing between us is the door. I'm sure he can hear my labored breathing, my not as light as I'd like footsteps. He rings the doorbell. Bastard, trying to catch me unaware. I don't fucking think so. I can just about make his knife out, clutching in close to his robe. It looks dull, tarnished. I call it lifeless, but it feels too much like an omen. I edge my way to the kitchen. The closest thing I've got to a weapon is an assortment of cooking knives. Fine. If it's a knife fight, then I'm going to make the first lunge. I compose myself for a minute, breathing some of the ash from my lungs before stepping back into the living room so I can make my way to the door. He's at the window. Game over. It's now or never. The police never get here in time. The knife is in my hand. Its weight isn't nearly as reassuring as I hoped it would be. The handle is moist in my sweaty palm, and I'm trembling so much that I think I might drop it from behind my back and give the game away. This is it. My heart is practically through my ribcage as I reach the door. No fear. If you're going down, go down fighting. I wonder if this is how every man on the point felt when breaching a room. How the brave souls of D-Day felt as they climbed into their boats. Death. Palpable. Real. With a face, I twist the lock. The door swings freely with a push. I taste the air. He stops. The knife. I never felt anything like it. The snag as it first hit. The grate as it connected with bone. The touch of the robe as my hand finished driving home my defense. My salvation. It was over. It took a few seconds for any reaction. I didn't know if it was enough. I stared into those black holes which should hold eyes and saw nothing. Everything in me wanted to burst. He sways. A groan comes from behind the mask. I smell blood as he falls. I stand, trying to will the life back into my limbs. This is the part where they catch you. Dead. Sure. Dead. Just long enough for you to let your guard down. I drag him to the chopping block round back and make sure he's not coming back. It's all over. I get back inside and wash up. I cry, and cry a lot. It feels like I've just been lifted from hell. Jesus wrapping a hand around my wrist when I most needed it. I never been the religious type. Maybe it's time that changed. My heart drops right back down into the pit from where I was just lifted. There's a knock at the door. The doorbell ringing. I peer outside and see a group of children and teens dressed as farmers. One looks like a priest. Stephen King. Children of the corn. Religious fanatics haunted by a bastardized deity roaming the fields. 5 of them. Well, there may be more of them, but that means nothing. I've done this once. It's time for the sequel. I twist the lock. The door swings freely with a push. I taste the air. Trick or treat. Yeah, I'm not falling for that one. Always check the candy. Written by MakRalston. Always check your children's Halloween candy. Always. I'm not saying this to fearmonger. To tell you the truth, I realized that most of the candy handed out on the holiday is likely purchased at Walmart the day before and shoved into a plastic pumpkin-shaped bowl. You probably haven't realized that most sane people don't poison candy or put glass in it, or whatever cautionary urban legend you've heard. The only guy who did do that did so to his own son. So, those neighbors of yours, don't treat them like criminals. They're just trying to innocently give the kiddos some sweets. This warning regarding a phenomenon that has no apparent origin. What I mean is, no one is really sure where it comes from. The candy in question isn't even so. You can't purchase it at any stores, and looking it up online results in no results. The candy, this aforementioned phenomenon, appears to be that of a cinnamon jawbreaker, not to be confused with the Atomic Fireball brand or any other similar sweet. It may resemble a red tinted gumball or a red lollipop with no stick. The point being, it's rather generic in appearance, which makes it tricky to spot the real deal. The candy is sometimes branded under the HH Sweets Company, a corporation that doesn't exist, at least not one registered by any agencies since 1999. If you search the internet, you might find some HH Sweet businesses, but I assure you they aren't the real deal, merely a namesake coincidence. If the label carries the HH name, beneath it, a tagline will read something to the effects of hot as hell, sweet as heaven. Not all of the candies sport the branding, but it certainly helps to spot it. This is why I advise if you find yourself or your kids with an unmarked red candy, the safest bet is to throw the sucker away. Documentation of the phenomenon only dates back to 2007, but there is the possibility that it's gone on for far longer. As of this recording, a known 9 people have ingested the candy, 4 of which being children under the age of 18. Each case has happened on October 31st, with the most cases occurring during 2016, with a total of 3 victims. The only clues as to the candy's appearance and branding is through the eyes of witnesses and subsequent investigations of any nearby and opened candy wrappers. Each of the victims' corpses, aside from the heads, remain untouched. The heads, however, are where things get strange. Each of the heads is completely burnt, like a used match. This would make identification of the victims troublesome, except for the fact that fingerprint analysis lent itself fittingly to the nature of these deaths, considering the hands of the deceased were completely intact. None of the victims were related in any way, with the only exception being a father and his 9-year-old daughter, Andy and Mary Kay Winfield from Lexington, Virginia. All of the others shared no relations other than the aforementioned candy. An eyewitness report from Brevard, North Carolina documented the full story behind the mysterious death of a 12-year-old boy, Shane Davis, who died on the Halloween of 2009. I was leaving the pharmacy at around 8:30 when it happened. He, Davis, was walking down the block in a zombie costume. I didn't even notice him at first because it was dark and the costume was dark. But then there was this flash of orange light, like someone lighting a candle. I turned around and this heat wave hit me in the face, and the smell, oh Lord, it smells like cooked meat. His head was on fire. There were people screaming, but there was nothing we could do. He screamed only for a moment, then he hit the pavement. I'll never unsee it. There were rumors it was a hex from a witch or something. I'm not a superstitious man, but when you see something like that, superstition doesn't seem too far off, you know? Similar reports were documented for many of the other victims. Shortly after ingesting the candy, the victims' heads would burst into flames, and soon thereafter, the victims would succumb to the injury and die. Many rumors and theories have since popped up surrounding the deaths and candy. Many include witches and spells, but some have garnered significant following beyond regional folklore. One of the most popular rumors cites the deaths as a result of the 1782 execution of Henry Hyson Cassidy, H.H. Cassidy, a candy maker from Onnacock, Virginia. The site of the first documented death from 2007, Cassidy, a local candy maker, was placed on trial for the disappearance of 2 young girls from the neighboring town. Despite having no apparent motive for abducting 2 young girls, the candy maker was charged as a reasonable suspect having access to sweets for alluring the children. Following a local investigation where one of the girls' bodies was discovered with candy in her pocket, Cassidy was charged with the murders and sentenced to death. Children from the town who once loved the sweets made by the candy maker began calling Cassidy the Witch of Onakok, making him one of the earliest male witches of legend. Being found guilty in a hasty trial, Cassidy was sentenced to death by molten metal, a process considered barbaric, except in the case of an accused witch. Cassidy, who swore his innocence until his death, had a molten metal ball dropped into his throat. While a quick death, it was certainly not painless. The townsfolk remarked that justice was served on that day, and the body was buried in a shallow grave. Given that Andy and Mary Kay Winfield were also from Virginia, many speculated that the spirit of Cassidy returned to punish those responsible for his death, using his signature candy as a way to torment the descendants of his accusers. The name too, H.H. Cassidy, would explain the name on the wrappers, H.H. Sweets. Another popular theory is usually referred to as the jack-o'-lantern story. Based on the Irish myth, the story goes that a man known as Stingy Jack tricked the devil on multiple occasions, resulting in his banishment from hell as well as heaven. As he was a trickster at heart, the man, forced to roam the earth, lit coal within a turnip and has been using it ever since to light his eternal path. The story, clearly rooted in the Halloween tradition of carving jack-o'-lanterns, has been used to explain the candy too. Stingy Jack, as he referred, seeks out souls to join him in his eternal punishment. The candy, which burns the head of its consumers, turns them into a somewhat crude jack-o'-lantern. This would explain the fiery demise of the victims, as well as its connection to the celebration of Halloween. In conjunction with the Stingy Jack narrative, there are some who conclude that candy is the work of the devil himself, tormenting unsuspecting holiday celebrators with death merely for the fun of it. A rather sick trick, yes, but then again, mischief is commonplace in the celebration of Halloween. As for this theory, the HH label would stand for Hell's Hottest or some other variation of hell alliteration. Despite these varying backstories to the candy, there is a far more grounded explanation that many have subscribed to. Rather than reading into the HH Sweets mythology, some conclude that HH Sweets is precisely what it claims to be, a candy company. The motive for committing these crimes is, at large, still a mystery, but this theory cuts out the claims of ghosts and devils, suggesting instead that a select few sickos had the willpower to conjure up sweets with the intent to kill. In the end, no one theory is correct, at least not one that can be confirmed by traditional means. A candy, that is, for a lack of better term, supernatural, can only be explained by the supernatural, making it extremely difficult to verify any of the information regarding it. If you wish to avoid the grisly results of the candy, it is advised to always check your children's Halloween candy. Better yet, avoid the trick-or-treating tradition altogether, or if you're highly concerned, perhaps it would be better to simply skip Halloween altogether. My Last Halloween, written by Locked334. Halloween used to be my favorite holiday. It was the one time of year you could be anything you wanted to be. You could draw out your darkest desire and display them for the world to see. No one would think you were odd for being the person you always wanted to be. There was no judgment for your choice of attire, and oftentimes you were commended for that choice. Then, at the end of the night, you received a reward for your efforts in the form of a bag full of candy. I'm far too old to go door to door begging for treats, but I enjoy watching my children do the same. Weeks in advance, we let them pick their costumes. They are far too young to delve into the ghastly and usually end up picking a character of a popular movie or a TV show. I simply take my pictures and urge them onto each doorway. I always remind them to say trick or treat before the door opens. It has been this way for a few years now, but I'm starting to question the tradition, especially after visiting 113 Forest Road. This past year, we made the rounds of our local neighborhood. We made sure to only approach homes that had their porch lights on, which was the unspoken rule. Our night had almost come to an end when we reached a home that had been vacant for the last 2 seasons. It was the largest within our neighborhood, towering at 2 stories when all others only had 1 level. It was a large brick Victorian monastery that may have once been beautiful, but the landscape had long needed work. It was the house most kids made stories about, and when we saw the dim glow of the yellow bulb, I was unsure of letting my children approach. My oldest begged to ring the doorbell, and my youngest simply wanted more candy. I was outnumbered and relented at their pleas. My wife sat within the idling vehicle while I followed close behind. The 2 made their way up the steps, and I waited at the bottom, like always. I reminded them of what to say. My oldest son held his brother's hand and pressed the lighted button. Ringing, much like church bells, echoed from within the house for a moment, before returning to silence. After a few seconds, they turned to me with questioning looks. I had noticed a moving truck parked outside the home earlier in the month and knew someone must live there, but I had not seen them. There was no car in the driveway, and I did not see any lights on inside. I started to think that they were simply gone and left the light on in case it was dark by the time they returned. I waved to my children to come back to the car and told them we would just head home. The look of disappointment on their faces told me they were not ready to end the night just yet. Their faces lit up as the door creaked to life and a voice beckoned them to wait. "Trick or treat!" they both screamed with excitement. A feeling rolled in me like thunder, and a signal of danger rang in my head. Something was not right. If they were home all this time, where was the car I had seen sitting in the driveway the last few weeks? I instinctively advanced on my 2 children, taking the steps in leaps. A feeling inside told me they should not go towards that voice, and I called for them to stop. As they turned towards the door, I chose both. The voice seemed strained, like that of a lifetime smoker. 2 ragged hands shot from the parted pathway and drew both of my little boys inside. Their screams echoed in my head. My adrenaline shot me forward, but my body slammed against the closing door. I pounded repeatedly, screaming obscenities of every nature. My body shook violently as my world became a spiral of despair. The whole scene drew the attention of my wife, and soon she was right behind me. In an effort to find the entry, I took a step back, lifted my right foot, and dropped it full force into the hardwood. The door frame shattered, allowing the barrier to fly freely into the darkness. I cried out in terror for my little boys. As I rushed through each room, my entire reason for living had been snatched up in an instant, and I had been too late to stop it. When the house had been searched completely with no results, my wife phoned the authorities. Through veils of agony, we both held each other until sirens lit up our tiny neighborhood. It has been a year now, and we still have no answers as to what happened to our children. My wife distanced herself from me, and I'm sure she blames me for whatever happened. I don't fault her for that. I blame myself as well. If I had not let them go to that door or listened to my feelings sooner, they would both still be here. Halloween is no longer a time of fun for us, but a reminder of our mistakes. I don't even leave my house on that night, and even the sight of pumpkin makes tears stream down my face. The drive home from work is especially hard. Witnessing the houses that decorate for the occasion, I am almost in a panic before I close myself within the safety of my home. Please, if you read this, don't let your kids visit 113 Forest Road on Halloween. Old News, written by ClericofMadness. It's the apocalypse, Pete, yelled Jacob as an explosion lit the skies. Downtown, which was close to Jacob, was suddenly and violently filled with screams and bright explosions. Already having flashbacks to World War II, Jacob began to panic even more when he saw people shambling about, going to and from the location of the explosions. Pete, his loyal old dog, growled feebly at the people passing by. They appeared to be walking corpses, and this became clear to Jacob after another bright explosion lit the area enough for his old eyes to see clear enough. Jacob turned for his door and yanked Pete's collar. The old hound went tumbling in with him as he slammed the door shut and went about setting the various locks in his home. After securely locking down his house and setting in place the window bars, he got up the nerve to take a peek outside. Out there, the sky flashed with explosions that rocked the building. Suddenly, a face popped up right in front of him. Startled, he fell backwards and onto his coffee table. "I know you're in there, old man," the person outside groaned. From the lighting inside his house, Jacob could see the burn marks and missing flesh on the person's face. Shouting wildly, he hit the lights and ran to his bedroom, which was upstairs. Pete was right behind him. The man outside banged on his door. "Come out and join the party," he groaned in a dead voice. After a few breathless minutes, the banging stops, and Jacob figured the man would bring a whole horde of his undead friends back to get him. He reached into his dresser drawer and moved away his socks, retrieving a pistol. "They've been saying the zombie apocalypse was coming, old Pete. I read it on them sites. Now it's true. I'm sorry, old boy," he said, aiming the gun at his lifelong companion, curled up on a pile of that week's newspaper. The dog died with only a quiet whimper. Next, Jacob turned the gun on himself. "I planned for this day so carefully, but now they know I'm here. Damn it. Sally, I'm coming to see you," he said as he pulled the trigger. That was not his last thought, however. The very last thing that went through his mind in the last few moments while he was still alive and breathing was a headline on one of the newspapers under Pete. "Zombie costume party downtown Halloween night."